Warren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Likewise, thanks for having me, Tommy.
So you guys are really experts in the industry on twofolds. I mean, your role at Cannaspire, you help entrepreneurs get licensed, and when they do get licensed, you also help them build their SOPs and their operations. Can you, before we start, can you give a little bit of a background about Cannaspire and your role?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm the Chief Compliance Officer here at Cannaspire. And really, we're an end-to-end consulting firm, right? So we help to license the client, to do all of their operational SOPs, help them find vendors, help them get their build out done, and then to keep that valuable license once they've achieved it, right? So this would be fractional compliance, working with them to evolve their business as it grows and adds new aspects. And then also, a lot of hiring, staffing, just basically the consulting side, right? Helping people figure out how to set up their facility, how to run things smoothly and make a buck. So, yeah, and I've really been a cultivator for 18 years. Any way you can grow it, I've done it. Indoor, outdoor, clean room, hydroponic, full sun organic. And I worked most recently with Big Island Grown in Hawaii. They were a vertically integrated medical licensee. So very
Wow, what got you into the industry?
honestly, I was a cultivator for years and I was training as a college professor, and it just kept pulling me back into the licensed industry, right? So there was so much more demand for bright, literate people in the cannabis side that can handle all of these SOPs for DOH inspection and then do our employee training than there was for an art history professor, right? So that's the short story of how I got here.
Wow. So you was a cultivator and switched over really to consulting the upside of things.
Yeah, and I would say that's it's really that, educational background where I take the professor approach. And that's sort of how it worked out in Hawaii with, training up and teaching everyone. And now moving into the consulting role with just lending that expertise and helping my, licensees and clients, learn how to carry themselves sort of.
So you've probably helped hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses get licensed, but also start operations. Based on your experience, what are some of the most important processes to get right early on?
Yeah, so I mean, oftentimes the employee management is one of the most overlooked aspects, right? So I've often seen that people will write an employee handbook, people being the operators, the owner of the license, and then they won't really dig into the nitty gritty of the actual policies. When is somebody late? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 2 minutes? What's your disciplinary policy? How are you tracking all of that? So you have to make sure that you're applying all of these rules consistently over time, because if you don't, what happens is down the road they may unionize. Suddenly your employee handbook becomes, almost a legal document you're being held to keep. And any policy that you wrote in there is suddenly being scrutinized and your feet are really held to the fire. So you want to plan ahead for that sort of thing to avoid these problems.
If I'm a new operator, where do I start? Because there's stuff that I know, and there's probably a lot of stuff that I don't know that should be in the manual.
Yeah, so I mean, really, a lot of it starts with the application, which includes a lot of SOPs in most cases, right? So from there, you need to look at what the state code is, what is actually required for you for reporting and compliance, but also operations hours, right? Like that's usually in the code. Minnesota is a good example. You have to leave, at least a 7 hour window for retail stores to be open. So all of these things go into your handbook, right? Your hours of operation, how many employees you even realistically need, down to the big one would be the disciplinary policy, making sure you're tracking all of that. Because look, it's especially in retail, you have very high turnover, right? So if you're not tracking everything and you do go to fire somebody, you should expect that you might have a suit on your hands at some point. And so this is where consistency of you gave the same disciplinary, protocol to literally all of your employees. the same, time off, the same, what you don't want to be caught doing is saying, well, so and so was late after they were 5 minutes late, but so and so didn't get rid up when they were 10 minutes late, right? So consistency, because all of those things can come back to bite you in the long run, and it ties you up in legal suits that are very costly.
Is there a resource online outside of the mandatory things that pertain to the state, but we're talking about operationally how the business should be run, how employees should be disciplined? Is there a resource online or a document somewhere where it'll give operators just a start of, okay, these are the big topic items that you should be really thinking about when creating your SOP?
You know, Unfortunately, no, is what I would say. And the industry doesn't have a standardized, template to where I see it a lot, right? Like Gusto for payroll, and they do have a lot of templatized HR. They're great. Oh, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from using that company. It works fine for many of my clients, right? But it's not cannabis specific. A lot of that stuff is really generic. And so this is where like zero tolerance violence workplace, that's in the legal code. That has to be in your employee handbook. Your break policies, those are usually mandated by the state, as to how long the shift is and how long of a break that they're entitled to. So this is where working with people that sort of know the lay of the land in the state that you're in, and then are willing to also look at, your operations in a nuanced fashion, because, you don't want super, intense policies that were meant for big corporations when you're a staff of 6 people, right? So
Yeah, you
yeah,
made a really good point. There's oftentimes, well, this is what we find. Oftentimes, cannabis owners look into the regs, right? And that's your role. You look into the regs and you have to make sure that you keep your license. But there's also regulations outside of cannabis that you have to abide by too. And that's typically with the state. So overtime hours, all of those things you kind of need in your guidelines as well.
totally. I mean, overtime hours down to your licensing and renewals. If you're a minority or woman-owned business, every state has a different set of requirements for when that has to be updated and applied for. And you need to keep that in order to keep your license because that's what you were awarded for. So this is where it is sort of a hodgepodge of high-level state and then municipal. We've got clients in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They have to have their mercantile license with the city, and that's a whole other separate application process. So you can see that document management, employee management, all of this very quickly becomes a beehive, right? And so you really need somebody that has a sense of how to control these documents, how to manage versions, and also stay on top of the changing regulations and all of your renewals as they come up.
Let's say, and this is the problem that we find. So let's say you create this beautiful document before you open. Hopefully you've done it before you open and you've gone over the document with your managers and with your team, etc. That's really the start. That's really the starting line. How should an operator think about incorporating in this document that you've created into operations so that employees live and eat it? The problem that I see is oftentimes SOPs are created and they're not really operationalized.
Yeah, they sit on the shelf. They were written once to meet the code requirement, to pass with the inspector, and then from there, God love you if your GM ever quits, you just lost the one person that knows how to train all of your bud tenders on how to take out the trash or how to sanitize the facility, whatever. So this is where it really comes down to having somebody that, knows how to put in the screenshots, knows how to walk through your POS system. Maybe it's Dutchy, metric, and sit down and take the time and actually make this really useful so that a bud tender with a high school level of education can come in, read this, and understand exactly, where the trash is located, how I have to take it out, and what I have to write down to then report that, to the state to make sure we're complying with all of that. So really it takes sort of a sense of what you actually do and then how to write it to meet the code. And this is really where things get tricky. Dispensary managers, they're great at doing their job. They're not always the best document writers. And if I'm being real, it's not always best to have the one performing the task writing the SOP, because if it's me, I'm going to make the steps as simple as possible so I can get it done and be done with my job, rather than doing it perfectly compliant in the best practice way. So it takes a little bit of, adjustment to answer your question. Is it takes actually a living, breathing document that you have to train people on and then go, you know what? No one's getting this. This isn't working. Back to the drawing board. We have to redraft.
That's so. Do you think that early on, when you're creating your version one of the document, and it takes intention to see it in practice and to enforce these SOPs, what is the window that an owner should have on having this a little bit more malleable? There's one thing about being compliant, but there's another thing about having SOPs that are, what is that word that I want? That are not so restrictive. You're compliant, but it's not burdensome of operations. It's realistic, I would say.
Totally. And I mean, it depends on what you're doing, right? So if I have a clone technique in a cultivation facility and I'm using a specific, grow media and a specific set of nutrients, I want it nitty gritty, right? I want to know the pH, the temperature of that clone. I want everything in detail, because if my master grower dies, I want to be able to hand that SOP to somebody else and still get great healthy clones, and my cultivation facility is humming right along, right? That being said, you don't want to make it so restrictive that, like, oh my gosh, you didn't follow the SOP and now you're being written up. And by the way, there were a few ways you could have done this that would have been compliant. So this is where really it ultimately takes down to hitting the code first, making sure that you're going to pass inspection. And then from there, get down to, just the highest level of the operations in these instructions of, the waste disposal room is located here. Here's the facility map. Here is the list of individuals and their job titles that are approved to do this. And here is the information that you have to record in order to be compliant with the state. And oh, by the way, in this SOP, there is a deadline for us to check and audit all of these forms on the regular. And then I would usually recommend a compliance schedule for at least 6 months or a year to go back through, check our SOP, and talk to our team. Does this make sense? Is this working? Oh no, we're not doing it anything like that. Or we bought a new piece of equipment that we're doing it with. Let's redraft, right? It's business continuity. It saves you on insurance. Like I've heard companies say, wow, we got a huge discount on our insurance because we actually wrote out all of our SOPs. These sorts of things make a huge difference. And it's not just, okay, we met the code, put them on the shelf, let's walk away, right?
Mhm. You mentioned something that may have passed a lot of our listeners is there may be a lot of ways to do certain things and still be compliant. And often what I see when people write their SOPs is they're very specific with one action. And if things change operationally that you don't know about, you you kind of restrict yourself to this one action or one vendor, whatever the case may be, when there might have been multiple ways for you to still be compliant and effective.
A good example would be like label printing. Okay, so we're printing labels to put on our pre-rolls before they go out. And oh, I bought a new label printer. I don't want to rewrite a whole SOP just for a new piece of equipment because it's got new buttons and this button's over here versus over there. Keep it simple. In the SOP, have a checklist for all of the things required on your label. The manager of production can go through, make sure that all of those things are dialed in, print out a test label, maybe even put that in the SOP, and then from there, just check. Oh, look, there's our license number. There's the harvest date. There's the COA QR code. There's all of the state required stuff. Check, we're good. Let's print out 1,000 of these and package up our pre-rolls. So that's where, to your point, you don't want to, it's not trying to customize everything to the nitty gritty. As long as you're hitting those high level things, I don't care what kind of printer you got, we could use anything.
How often should somebody review or audit that people are following their SOPs? And how often should you review, hey, are these SOPs still relevant to our operations, or have we evolved? And is there a better way of when should it be, when should we update this?
So anytime the code changes, you pretty much have to update. So I just dealt with this in Ohio. They changed their adult use purchase limits from, a rolling 10-day limit to 1 day you can buy 2.5 ounces. Well, that's a huge difference. So this means going through and changing all the purchase limits in their sales SOPs so that all of their employees know this right away on day one. So that's the first trick, is if the code changes. Number two, at least annually, pull them off the shelf, dust them off, read it, ask if this is even what we do anymore and if it makes sense. And then the last one would be if you're expanding or adding any new processes or steps. So like say you're a manufacturer, you started as a solventless lab, now you're going into distillate production. Well, guess what? We need a whole new batch of SOPs for that level of production. So anytime you add, we just added a new license of manufacturing to a cultivator. Well, they now need, probably some SOPs for cross-contamination just to make sure that no one in the facility is, fouling up a brand new harvest with dirty gloves that they were just rolling pre-rolls with or something like that, right? So it's definitely, I would say, annually when the code changes, and then as you add and expand.
That's updating. How often should you audit your operations to see if you're abiding by what you wrote down?
Yeah, so we try to do this annually. For most of our clients, we'll come through and do an annual review. For retailers, we'll do, a mock, inventory pull, make them pull a few of their things and make sure they reconcile with their POS and their seed to sale tracking system. Another would be just after a problem, right? So like we had a farm, they had a theft, and so immediately after that, you need to go through all of your security SOPs, all of your, equipment and gear, identify what the problem was. It turns out one of our cameras didn't even catch the individual that broke into the outdoor field. So that's our corrective action, right? Replace the camera, go and test it, make sure that it's working, and we can walk into the field at night and it actually, gets an image of us, right? So these are the sorts of things that it's basically check them regularly. But what I do is I meet with the team on a bi-weekly basis when I'm playing fractional compliance officer. And this is sort of a time for the dispensary, the cultivator, to say, we just got inspected and they dinged us for X, Y, and Z. Well, great. You go back into the dispensary and keep selling cannabis. I'm going to update your employee handbook with the new employee training regs that just changed in the state. We'll email that to the OCM, the CRC, whoever the regulatory body is, and you keep going along and the corrective action is handled. So, I would say it takes a compliance officer to sort of keep the finger on the pulse and identify these pain points, because the last thing you want is the inspector to come in and say, well, hey, where's all your sanitation logs? Where are your waste disposal logs? Then you're out of compliance. Then you either get fined or, it's a red mark on your record.
Within the operations or within the company, what have you seen that work in who should actually own SOPs? Should it be the owner? Should it be the manager? the back? Who's typically a good profile to own this part of the business?
Yeah, so usually with dispensaries, it's your GM, just because if they don't know everything, opening and closing, cash counting, the nitty-gritty of the day in and day out, they're not a good GM. And then the other would be your cultivator, a rose by any other name, director of cultivation, master cultivator, whatever you want to call them. Obviously, they decide your grow media, they decide, your fertigation system, your nutrients, all of that. And notoriously, they're the worst about writing this stuff down because they want to be the magic individual that knows the secret formula. Well, sorry, this is a business. If, you die out surfing one day, we need you to come back, and write all of this down for us. And then manufacturing, any recipes, any, processes, you should have a production manager that sort of oversees all of that and then also does all of the training, which again, they better know all those SOPs because you're going to be teaching everyone how to wash the hash or roll the pre-rolls or, press the rosin or whatever it may be. And if people are smashing their fingers in the rosin press, well, I'm going to be looking at you first for what did you teach this guy?
I'm so happy you didn't say the owner because they're typically not the best.
Yeah, they're the worst. I mean, I don't mean the worst, but it's rare that I have an owner that is fully involved day to day in the operations that really, really knows. I mean, I see it. I have some small dispensaries that those owners are in there. They know their shop inside and out. They're basically the GM that I just described. Oftentimes, if they're a lucky licensee from a lottery, like you mentioned, they don't know the industry and they don't necessarily know what the policies should be. So this is where an experienced manufacturer, an experienced cultivator, an experienced dispensary GM, they're going to know pretty much what they have to report, what they have to do, and also just what industry best practices are. So, yeah.
So we spoke about 80/20 rule, and we spoke about the employee handbook as something that business owners need to get locked down before the doors open. What are some of other processes that you think or that that's really, really important before you open shop?
Yeah, so really just knowing your job titles and roles and what, compliance related tasks those individuals will be responsible for when they come in the door. Because quite often you see overwhelmed GMs that if they even had an AGM that, was checking the sanitation log and the waste disposal log, then great. Now they can focus on staffing, right? Which is just such a big lift. You have high turnover in dispensaries. You kind of want to keep them focused. So I would say, it really comes, the handbook's a big one. That's probably the most contentious. But when it comes to cultivation, probably your PPE and safety stuff, all of your OSHA manufacturing, all of your OSHA, all of your SDS reporting, just because, people forget OSHA is the only federal government agency that could come into any cannabis facility in the United States. So if you have a ladder and somebody falls off of it, guess what? That's an OSHA claim. So that's probably the biggest one for, CYA and just being safe. And then lastly, your formulations and your brand identity. I mean, and it can be as nitty gritty as with retailers. What is your customer service policy? What are the returns policies? You could have this on day one. What can I return and what can't I? How do people greet customers and send them out the door? What is your brand in terms of how friendly, how interactive? Honestly, having a policy that you can train people on day one, it'll make a crazy difference in how, your customers feel coming out the door with like, wow, I got fully educated on all of this stuff that I didn't know anything about, and I feel good about what I bought.
I really like that you mentioned that because that often gets missed. The North Star, your brand, and your brand, oftentimes people have the misconception that your brand is a logo and, a couple phrases. but it's really how customers interact with your entire business.
I mean, it's as simple as, make eye contact when they come in the door and greet them, and then immediately, figure out how familiar with dispensaries they are. Are they a nana or grandpa that has never purchased anything and you really need to educate them so that they don't go out the door and then call back later saying, oh my gosh, my wife thinks she's dying. We've had those calls in the old days, right? Versus, the savvy consumer like myself who's like, hey, I know what I'm looking for. Tell me about the menu. Can you make any recommendations? And get me in and out so that you can make a buck and get more customers in and pump the volume for your shop.
I forgot to ask you this, and I think this is really important, is how should owners roll out an SOP? For example, the handbook. What does an effective rollout program look like?
It starts with your GM. So whoever's at the top, they're the ones enforcing this, right? So this is where all quality programs start with a commitment from the management, right? So if your GM's not on board with any of these policies, like, oh, I'm not going to, write somebody up when they're more than 5 minutes late. I don't care about that. We're a weed facility. As long as the work gets done, well, maybe that's not a good policy to have written in your handbook. If they're not going to enforce it, it could cause you problems down the road. So just making sure that whoever you have is, first of all, doing what's compliant with the state, because that's not optional, right? Like when you're late or not, we can argue over whether that's important. But at the same time, these are the ones enforcing it. And if they enforce it, inconsistently, that's the biggest thing that's pulling you towards a lawsuit.
Gotcha. So, and that's a really good point that you've made. Alignment with the GM, because they're the person that is overseeing operations and enforcing the rules. Consistency is, even without lawsuits, consistency, what we found is so important. There's nothing worse than having two owners that are managers. They write the schedules, and there's nothing written down on when employees need to request time off. Or if the rules are being applied inconsistently, the employees get very confused at what are the rules.
Exactly. And I mean, to finish the question about how you roll it out, once the GM or the high up manager signs off and says that's okay, you've got to train somebody on it now. So if you go to train somebody on it and they're like, oh my gosh, these screenshots and all of this, I got to click through this stuff and it makes no sense, that's bad. You need your employees to be able to understand this and keep it as simple and as high level as possible to hit that, right? So this is where make sure your management's on board, then go and actually teach somebody how to do it. They understand it, they acknowledge it, we're on board. Awesome. Let's go ahead and implement it. We're going to train 10 more people all on the same SOP.
Ideally, when should you have this done before you open?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the stuff you have to have done, like I'm doing it in Minnesota right now to convert all of these licenses that we help these individuals to win. To your point, since they're not open yet, I'm kind of keeping it as high level as possible to just what is required. And then from there, once they're open, we're going to work with their teams to sort of make these bespoken, to customize them, to fit their operations, because we don't want them to be missing anything in terms of their reporting requirements because they changed something like, oh, your cloning technique, well, it turns out you're taking really big cuttings and you need to tag them right away because the state says, once they're over 6 inches tall, etc. Well, if you were taking shorter cuttings, you wouldn't need to tag them right away, right? So it's an example of these sort of shifts in operational method that you would probably want to capture in a, custom SOP that you maybe don't need just to get open with licensure from the state.
Gotcha. And say, typically, actually, I should ask you this. Oftentimes, new entrepreneurs that are opening up a dispensary, it's really hard to gauge when they should hire, when should somebody be hired before the doors open, and how do I assess how many employees do I need? So what's kind of what should be the thought process of somebody that's just opening up the doors in regarding this, and then on top a layer on top of that is training.
Yep. Yep. So I always tell all of my clients to run lean. Okay. So, and this is where I've seen dispensaries hire 24 employees to staff up on day one with an army. And then, no one knows they exist yet. The marketing hasn't really hit, word of mouth hasn't gotten out. They wound up laying off 10 people. Well, that's 10 people that really don't feel great about you in your community, that are, maybe leaving nasty reviews, that are, it's just, it creates bad will, right? So, what I always tell people is get your key management staff that are going to do this hiring and training in place, make sure that they're ready, and then from there, be prepared to just pump out those applications and get those in and start doing the hiring right away. Especially in the beginning, you're going to have a few that just don't work out right away in a week, 2 weeks, and you need another. So this is where staying lean, having some real dedicated core team members that aren't afraid, especially in the beginning, to pick up slack, that will help you survive, as things increase in scale, to start just, ramping up, because you don't want too much payroll.
Yeah, no, that's really sound advice, and I've seen two stories. There's nothing bad about being really busy during opening day and people needing to hustle, and if you're an owner, you're not involved. You have to be. You're the bud tender in opening day. You're the jack of all trades, for that week.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and that's where I've seen some owners be very successful in robust markets like Atlantic City, New Jersey, by staying incredibly lean and being willing to, deal with the turnover issues. Like they had employees that got caught with theft. That's common in retail. It means that security measures were working, but at the same time, now you have to replace this person, and that's another training. So again, having those owners that are willing to just whatever, we'll stay up till 11 and run this place until I get the staff in place that I can lean on. And then when they get it, they're happier for it because they're sleeping at night because they know that their dedicated person is taking care of it.
Ideally, when should you have your forming team, your initial team before opening day, to give you just enough time to go over your SOPs with the team?
I mean, I would say at least 6 weeks because you've got to do hiring, you've got to do training. You probably need them in there even helping you set up your dispensary. If it's a cultivation, they're definitely helping you set up your grow. So, this is just where minimum of 6 weeks, having that operational payroll for at least your GM and an AGM, most likely. And, it's going to be really hard, but hey, they're helping to meet the IT vendor and unlock the building and get IT installed, or the camera guy. They're helping you to move the ball forward towards that final licensure and opening day. And they're also going to have to work with all of these employees. So you might want to have worked with them for at least a few weeks before, you set them loose on a team.
That's really sound advice. And as they're hiring the bud tenders, the back, what should be ideally, and in business, you wish for the best, but that never really happens. When should those individual contributors start? How many days before opening week so that you have time to train them?
Honestly, 2 weeks. Like I try to keep it short because it's a cost. And like I said, especially initially, you tend to have like, oh, we hired 5 people and 3 of them showed up, you know? And so that's where, not overstaffing and overpaying for people that may not even be there in a month, that's definitely good. And just being willing to take on some of those long hours. And like you said, don't be afraid to have a line. You might only be that busy for the first 2 weeks. And really, If you are that busy nonstop, what a great problem to have, right?
Yeah,
So,
right. That's not a bad problem.
no, I would rather staff up and feel like I'm just constantly running back and forth and oh my gosh, I keep having to buy more inventory, shucks. Then going, no one knows we're here and we've got 8 people standing on the floor and only 2 of them are even needed, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Or is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel is really important?
I would say the one thing is that we often write a lot of these SOPs as part of the application, and then you are forced to sort of wear the suit after the fact, right? And so this is where it really helps to sort of write those SOPs, like you said, as loosely and openly for the application. I call it the P in SOP stands for policy, not procedure, because we're just going to follow the policies and meet the code. And then once you start moving towards operations, hiring your master grower, your production manager for manufacturing, your GM, start to hammer down the nitty-gritty as you move towards operations and don't make promises to the state that you can't keep. So if it's written in that SOP, you better be willing to follow it because the inspector's going to call you out on it.
That's really sound advice. Like really sound advice. I so do you, is it best practice to even the first 3 months or 6 months be to have more oversight on your SOPs and check in operationally, does this make sense?
I think you're going to get that just because you're training people on them constantly. And so you're almost going to go through a trial by fire where you just hired this whole staff to help you run things. And then you go, oh my gosh, Todd and Mary and Jim, they could not understand this cloning SOP. It's terrible, right? So that's where I do think some of the fires, they immediately pop up because you just realize that, it wasn't right from the start.
Yeah, and does that happen often? Because I find a lot of people that just get into business, they want things to be perfect, but that's generally not the case. It's you're constantly learning, constantly improving. How how common is that for that
I
to
tell
happen?
people it's a living, breathing document. It's going to evolve, and we're going to track iterations of the versions through the entire life of your business. And this is where you want it to be that way because your business should be always changing and evolving. The code is changing and evolving. I mean, shoot, in a few years, the feds might come in. Every manufacturer in America is going to suddenly be holding to GMP. That's going to be a massive shift in people's SOPs and the operators that planned ahead, looking at that, federal production guideline, are going to be the ones that survive into federal decriminalization or legalization. So, living, breathing document. Don't be afraid to always be updating and always checking the regs because if you don't, you risk fines, regulatory delays, or lawsuits because of your employees.
Warren, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't stress enough how important that is. How can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me at wharaz, HARASZ, at cannaspire.com, or you can reach out. We have a great drift on our website at cannaspire.com, www.cannaspire.com, and just reach out. It has full information on all of our services, even web marketing and SEO, brand design. So it's all up there. We would love to hear from you.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Tommy.